He only came in for a bottle of water, but what he saw changed his entire life. Two little voices, one loaf of bread, and a moment that cracked the icy shell of a billionaire's heart. This isn't a story about charity. It's a story about staying when you don't have to, about finding a family where you least expect it. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? The small corner grocery store buzzed with its usual late afternoon rhythm. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead mingled with the quiet rustle of plastic bags, the beeping of the cash register, and the occasional cough from customers wrapped in scarves and heavy coats. Outside, the sky had already turned the color of worn steel, threatening a winter storm. Inside, the store was slightly warmer, though the chill clung to everyone's shoulders like a tired ghost. In the middle of the narrow aisle leading to the counter, two children stood in silence, gripping a single loaf of bread in gloved hands. They were twins, unmistakably so, not just in their faces, which bore the same faint dusting of freckles and wide, dark eyes, but in their posture, in the solemn way they held themselves. Mia and Miles, both 8, wore identical winter jackets that were a size too small and frayed at the edges. The hoods had long lost their fur lining, and the zippers were bent just enough to resist closing. Their boots bore the marks of time and repeated patchwork attempts. Despite their age, something about them carried a stillness that did not belong to children. They waited patiently, their faces pale, not from cold, but from something deeper, a constant strain. They had reached the front of the line. The cashier, a man in his 50s with gray stubble and tired eyes, scanned the bread without emotion. He looked down at the register and mumbled the price. Mia's small hand slid into her pocket, searching for something that wasn't there. She looked up at the man and said something quietly, almost mechanically, the kind of request repeated often enough to lose its hesitation. The man's face didn't change. He had heard it before. Every winter, almost like clockwork, there were always kids or mothers who came with the same story. No money today, but could they take just one thing, just this once? He gave them a look that wasn't cruel, only hardened, and shook his head. Behind them, a line of customers shifted impatiently, unwilling to make eye contact, focused instead on their phones, on their carts, on anything but the two small figures standing in uncertainty with a loaf of bread they could not afford. Standing near the refrigerator unit, a man had been watching quietly. He had come into the store absent-mindedly, intending only to grab a bottle of mineral water before heading back to a late meeting. Tall, with sharp features and wearing a dark, immaculate overcoat, he looked out of place in the modest store. His name was Arthur Blake, and at 35, he was known in business circles as one of the youngest and most calculating hotel tycoons in the country. He owned several high-end hotels across major cities and had investments in industries ranging from real estate to tech. Efficiency, precision, and logic had brought him this far. Emotion had no place in his strategy. Until now. Arthur found his hand moving without thinking. He stepped forward, pulling a thick bill from his wallet and placing it on the counter. His voice was low, just loud enough to break the silence around the twins. The cashier blinked, hesitated, then nodded and began bagging the bread. Arthur gestured toward the shelves, indicating that they should take more. Milk, maybe something warm. Mia and Miles looked at him uncertain, then obeyed. They moved slowly, taking only one more item each. They didn't understand why he was doing this. They didn't thank him. They just left quietly, clutching their small paper bag like it was treasure. Arthur remained standing for a few moments after they exited. Something about their eyes, the weight in them, the absence of self-pity, had lodged itself inside him. He left the store without buying the mineral water, walked the short distance to his car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time before finally starting the engine. Later that evening, back in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Arthur tried to focus. His calendar was packed. Acquisition deals, executive meetings, contract reviews. The usual. He poured himself a glass of wine and stood by the massive window that offered a flawless view of the financial district. The city blinked back at him through thousands of glowing lights, sterile and perfect. Below him, the streets wound like arteries, pulsing with indifferent life. Somewhere down there, 2 children walked home with a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. He couldn't forget them. The penthouse was everything a successful man should own. Polished hardwood floors, sleek steel and marble surfaces, art that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. A personal gym, a theater room, a kitchen that had never been used. His phone lit up with market updates. One of his hotels had just signed a celebrity endorsement deal. A deal that would have excited him yesterday meant nothing now. He sat down in the silence and thought of the boy and the girl. He hadn't even asked their names. The next morning, Arthur's assistant, Helen, found a voicemail waiting for her when she checked her phone before sunrise. Arthur's voice was calm but firm. He didn't offer an explanation, just a request. Find out who the children were quietly, no attention, no headlines, no questions asked. Helen was used to strange requests. This one was different, but she said nothing. She got to work. Arthur spent the rest of the morning staring at the view from his office. He didn't take meetings. He didn't return calls. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen later that day. She had found them. Names: Mia and Miles Carter. Age: 8. Their mother, Margaret Carter, was unemployed, a former office clerk. She had been in and out of the hospital with respiratory complications. No father listed. No extended family in the area. They lived in a small building in the Eastern District, one of those forgotten streets where the paint peeled from the walls and stairwells smelled of mildew and burnt oil. The kind of place Arthur had long since erased from his memory. And yet he was already grabbing his keys. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't take a driver. He left his sleek company-issued car behind and walked, trading the polished marble of his world for cracked sidewalks and graffiti-tagged buildings. He didn't know why. Only that he couldn't not go. When he reached the building, the smell hit him first. Dampness and old cigarette smoke. He stepped carefully over discarded wrappers and climbed the stairs slowly, listening. On the 3rd floor, he stopped in front of a door with peel-in numbers and a broken light overhead. He didn't knock. He stood there for several minutes, just listening. Inside, he could hear the faint murmur of a child's voice, then another. A soft laugh, cut off too quickly, then coughing. A woman's cough, deep and sharp. He turned and walked away. Outside, the cold stung sharper than before. He sat on a nearby bench, watching the world move around him. His phone buzzed again with meeting reminders. He turned it off. He didn't want to go back. Not yet. Not until he figured out why, for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He watched the building for a while longer. Eventually, the door opened and the twins stepped outside, carrying a trash bag filled with aluminum cans. They walked in silence, side by side, small figures against the weight of the city. Arthur followed from a distance, unnoticed, his thoughts heavier with each step. Something had begun. He didn't understand it. He only knew one thing for certain. He would not be turning away. The city rose slowly around Arthur as he returned to the purring quiet of his world. Sleek glass buildings caught the early winter sunlight like cold steel blades. His penthouse towered above it all, an isolated monument to efficiency, wealth, and design. Inside, nothing was out of place. The espresso machine blinked obediently from its polished corner. His tailored coat hung in perfect symmetry on the brass hook, and the faint scent of cologne and leather settled into the air like silence. Yet everything now felt strangely lifeless. Arthur sat at the edge of his bed, fully clothed, hands clasped. His mind retraced the morning. Every detail, every step, every glance from those children. Their expressions had held something he couldn't quite name. Not pleading, not hope, but a quiet resistance to breaking. The kind of restraint that belonged to people twice their age. He couldn't shake it. The way the girl had looked at him, the way the boy hadn't spoken, only observed. There had been no attempt to charm him, no manipulation, just honesty. Brutal, calm honesty. The city outside his window buzzed on, oblivious. He could return to it, pretend the encounter was just another flicker in his otherwise controlled life. But something in his chest resisted. Not pity. Arthur Blake did not believe in charity. He believed in strategy. He believed in efficiency. And yet, this wasn't that. This was something else. He pressed the intercom. "Helen," he said, his voice composed but edged with tension, "find out who they are." She didn't ask questions. She never did. Within hours, a file landed on his desk, minimal but precise. Mia and Miles Carter, born minutes apart, same last name as their mother, Margaret Carter. No father listed on any documents. Margaret, 34, had worked as a receptionist for over a decade before health issues led to sporadic hospital stays and ultimately job loss. No criminal records, no state support. Her last known hospital visit had been 2 weeks ago, diagnosed with acute bronchitis compounded by untreated asthma, no insurance. Arthur stared at the report. It was impersonal, clinical, but the facts cut deeper than expected. He read it again, slower this time, as if searching for something between the lines. The address was familiar now, East Halloway, a part of the city he hadn't visited in over 15 years. He remembered it vaguely, through the haze of childhood memories he had long since buried. He closed the file and looked out the window. The skyline offered no answers, only glass reflections and perfect lines. Below, cars streamed through intersections in organized chaos. People moved with purpose, unaware of what they were passing. Just like he had. Until yesterday. His phone buzzed. Helen's voice came through. "Would you like me to arrange a donation or—" "No," he interrupted. "No donations. I want to help them directly, quietly." There was a pause, then a simple, "Understood." Arthur hung up and sat in silence. The last time he had deviated from logic was, he couldn't remember. Everything in his life had been built on control. Control of assets, control of image, control of time. Even his rare acts of generosity were tax-structured and press-approved. But this was chaos. And he wasn't turning away. The next day, he returned. This time, not to the building, but to a side street across from a recycling center. He had traced the children's movements from the address. Mia and Miles were there again, dragging a bulging trash bag toward the rusted metal gate. Their bodies moved in tandem, small, careful, deliberate. Their breath fogged in the cold air. They waited in line behind two older boys, shifting from foot to foot, but never speaking. When it was their turn, they handed over the bag. The man behind the counter weighed it, counted coins into a small plastic cup, and slid it across. Arthur watched from the shadows of a nearby alley. He didn't interfere. Not yet. He followed them from a distance as they walked to a nearby pharmacy. Mia entered while Miles waited outside, staring at the tiled sidewalk. When she emerged, she was holding a paper bag tightly to her chest. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. They walked home as if rehearsed, never once looking behind them. The next day, Arthur waited again. This time, when they exited the building, he stepped forward. They froze, recognizing him immediately. His coat was the same, though this time his posture was different, less formal, more unsure. He offered a ride, a simple gesture, a warm car in a freezing wind. They hesitated. Mia looked at Miles. He nodded barely. Arthur didn't speak much on the ride. He drove carefully, as if the city itself had changed under his wheels, the pharmacy again, a grocery store next. He stayed in the car as they shopped. When they returned, he handed them 2 cups of hot cocoa he'd bought from a cafe on the corner. They didn't drink right away. They held them carefully, like something rare. At no point did they thank him. Not because they were ungrateful, but because they were careful with trust. After the errands, he asked if he could walk them home. They said nothing but didn't object. The building looked even smaller now. The chipped bricks and faded paint seemed crueler than before. He helped carry the bags up the stairs. On the landing, the door opened before they knocked. A woman stood there, thin, pale, wearing a robe tied too tightly around her waist. Her eyes were sharp, guarded. She looked past the children and locked her gaze on Arthur. "Who are you?" the look said, though her lips didn't move. Arthur nodded gently, stepped back, and set the bags down. No speeches, no explanations. He took a small card from his wallet and handed it to Mia. "If anything," he said quietly, "I'm at the Bry's." Then he turned and walked away. That night, he sat in his penthouse, surrounded by silence. The city sparkled beyond the glass, but it looked different now, unreal, like a set behind which nothing lived. His phone chimed with another report: market updates, expansion potential in Dubai, hotel performance metrics. He ignored them. Instead, he watched the steam curl from his untouched tea. And in the fogged window's reflection, he didn't see a hotel magnate. He saw a man remembering how it felt to be needed, the kind of need that numbers couldn't quantify. The days that followed moved with a strange new rhythm. Arthur found himself returning to East Holloway without thinking. His car took the turns automatically. His steps found the familiar stairwell with ease. The building no longer seemed foreign. It had a scent, a soundscape, a texture he began to recognize. Cracking pipes, distant footsteps, a rusted latch echoing down the hall. He didn't always interact. Often, he simply watched from a distance. He learned the patterns. In the mornings, Miles would carry a small garbage bag filled with crushed cans. Mia would adjust her brother's backpack, pat down his collar, and they'd walk together to the recycling center, then to the schoolyard, then home. In the evenings, they visited the pharmacy, or the corner store, or stood in line at the shelter's soup window. They worked with the focus of adults, barely speaking, each movement efficient and precise. There was no rebellion in them, no outbursts, no complaints, only endurance. Arthur never announced his presence. He offered rides sometimes, held open doors, handed over discreet envelopes with gift cards or grocery vouchers. Once, he quietly left a second-hand laptop at their doorstep inside a waterproof bag. Another time, a brand-new winter coat for each of them, left hanging anonymously on a stairwell hook. They never asked for anything. He never explained. And so the pattern formed. The children began to expect him, not in the way children expect toys or treats, but as one might expect the sun to rise. Quietly, without question. His presence, though rarefied, became constant in its own way. They didn't talk much, but they no longer stiffened when they saw him. Mia began to wave. Miles gave small nods of recognition. Their mother, Margaret, remained distant. Once she met him on the stairs, her eyes guarded, her voice clipped. "Thank you, but we're fine," she said. He didn't argue. He only nodded and kept walking. He understood. She was fighting for the last thread of control. To depend on a stranger, especially a wealthy one, was to admit defeat. And she hadn't been broken yet. She was still trying, but illness didn't wait for dignity. Late one night, long after Arthur had returned to the penthouse, shed his coat, and settled into the deep quiet of his meticulously arranged home, a sound disturbed him. An alarm, a notification, something faint and distant. Except it wasn't sound. It was a feeling. An unease that pressed behind his eyes. He couldn't sleep. Down in East Holloway, in that narrow, crumbling apartment, Margaret Carter burned with fever. Her breath came shallow, each one more labored than the last. Her skin flushed red, then ghostly pale, then red again. Her limbs twitched, her eyes fluttered, half closed. She murmured names, none of them present. Mia sat beside her, wringing a cloth over a chipped bowl, placing it against her mother's forehead again and again. Beside her, Miles read the dosage instructions from a half-empty medicine bottle. He calculated time in silence. They had already given her the last fever reducer they owned. "She's not waking up," Mia finally whispered. Miles didn't answer. He was staring at the small paper that had lived in his pocket for a week. It was wrinkled and soft from folding and unfolding. "Should we?" Mia didn't finish. Miles gave the smallest nod. Then she was up. No hesitation. She pulled on her boots over mismatched socks, shoved her arms into a too-thin coat, and clutched the paper like a life raft. Miles handed her his flashlight, the one with flickering batteries. He watched her leave through the cracked door and listened to her footsteps disappear into the stairwell. Mia didn't cry. She didn't falter. She ran. The city at night was a different thing entirely. It stretched wide and empty, lit by cold street lamps and streaks of neon. Wind curled through alleyways and bit into her cheeks. Her breath came sharp and fast, not from fear, but from urgency. Her legs, small and underfed, pounded the pavement without rest. She passed strangers. No one stopped her. No one asked. Her mind counted intersections. She remembered the way, barely. She had memorized the symbols above the entrance, a golden sign, sleek and warm, hanging over massive glass doors. When she reached the hotel, she staggered, chest heaving. The Breeze Hotel towered above her like a foreign palace. Everything glittered. Even the sidewalk sparkled beneath polished brass lamps. Inside, the lobby was a different universe. Warm, rich, scented with something floral and expensive. A uniformed guard glanced up, already preparing to ask her to leave. Then he saw her eyes. Big, dark, wide with desperation. Something human passed across his face. "I need him," she said. "The man. The one with the kind eyes." The words hung in the air and the man moved. 10 minutes later, Arthur Blake descended the elevator without his coat, tie loosened, phone in hand. He stopped short when he saw her standing near the reception desk, coat damp from sweat and wind, hair clinging to her forehead, her chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked. Then he walked straight to her and knelt down. She didn't have to explain. He was already moving. Within another 10 minutes, they were speeding through the streets. Arthur drove himself. Mia sat beside him, shaken, not from cold, but from something deeper. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. The contact steadied her. Neither of them spoke. When they arrived, he didn't wait. He carried Margaret from the bed with the practiced hands of someone who had done this before. Mia and Miles followed behind, silent shadows, clutching each other. The hospital had long since closed its general admissions for the night, but Arthur didn't stop at the front desk. He didn't wait in line. He called ahead to a contact, an executive medical partner for one of his hotel health programs, and, within minutes, Margaret was wheeled into a private emergency bay. The staff moved fast, urgent but precise. The children stood in the hallway, eyes wide. Arthur remained with them. He didn't call anyone. He didn't check his phone. He bought hot chocolate from the vending machine. He handed it to them wordlessly. They drank. He bought another. 2 hours later, a doctor emerged. His eyes were tired, but his voice was calm. "She'll make it," he said. "You brought her just in time. Another hour or two, it might have been too late." Arthur didn't react. He only turned to Mia, who had gone pale. She sat down slowly. Miles lowered himself next to her and leaned into her side. The doctor looked at them for a long moment, then walked away. They stayed there, in the hallway, until the sky outside began to lighten into pale gray. The vending machine hummed behind them. A janitor pushed a mop across the floor in wide, deliberate strokes. Arthur watched the children. He realized something then. This was not the end of the night. This was the beginning. The next morning broke slowly, casting a pale blue hue across the glass walls of Arthur's penthouse, though he wasn't there to see it. He sat in the waiting area of the private clinic, elbows resting on his knees, a paper cup of cooling coffee untouched in his hand. Beside him, Mia and Miles lay curled up together on the couch beneath one of the wool blankets he had brought from his car. Their faces, even in sleep, carried the marks of a night spent in fear and resilience. Nearby, the door to the ICU suite remained closed, guarded by silence and machinery behind it. Arthur didn't move. His eyes flicked from the clock on the wall to the twins, then back again, as if measuring something beyond time. It wasn't about appointments anymore. Somewhere between the moment Mia burst into his hotel and the doctor's quiet confirmation that they had arrived just in time, Arthur had crossed a threshold. And once crossed, some lines never blurred back into place. The sterile white of the hospital hallway made his tailored clothes feel theatrical, like a costume from a life no longer fully real. He didn't need boardroom silence or rooftop views now. He needed only this hallway and the ability to sit there and wait, not as a magnate, not as a provider, but simply as someone who had shown up when no one else had. When Margaret finally opened her eyes late the next day, the light in the room was soft and diffused, filtered through slatted blinds. She blinked against it, her breath shallow but steady. A nurse was adjusting the IV beside her, and then she turned her head slightly and saw Arthur sitting at the far end of the room, his coat folded beside him, a small cup of tea in his hand. There were no introductions, no conversations. She didn't thank him. He didn't offer comfort. They existed in the same room like two distant planets momentarily caught in the same orbit. But she noticed the second wool blanket tucked around Mia, who sat beside her bed sketching something on the back of a pharmacy receipt. She noticed the slight red stain on Arthur's knuckle, likely from opening a stubborn vending machine snack bar for Miles. And she noticed the fatigue on his face, not from stress, but from a different weight entirely, one that looked strangely familiar. 2 days later, she was discharged. Arthur arrived at the clinic in a dusty, modest taxi, not his usual driver, not his luxury car. He said nothing as they all packed into the vehicle, Mia squashed between her mother and brother, Arthur beside the driver, watching the rearview mirror more than the road. They didn't talk much on the way home, but when they reached the apartment building, it was Mia who turned and said quietly, "He stayed." Margaret glanced sideways, caught Arthur's reflection in the mirror, and nodded to herself more than to anyone else. A week passed before he returned. He stood at the same landing outside their apartment, holding a small clipboard and a neutral expression. Margaret opened the door before he could knock. She looked stronger, pale, still thin, but with color in her cheeks and a steadiness in her shoulders. "I wanted to offer you something," Arthur said. "It's not charity, it's a job, admin position, 1 floor in 1 hotel, flexible hours, benefits, safe environment." Margaret studied him for a long time. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes scanned him like someone trying to distinguish illusion from reality. "I don't want to be someone's project," her eyes seemed to say. Arthur didn't flinch. "You're not," his silence answered. "You're someone I believe in." She didn't give an answer that day, but 2 weeks later she walked through the glass doors of the Breeze Hotel in a borrowed blouse and old flats and signed in under a name badge that read Margaret C. No one knew her connection to the owner. No special treatment was given. She worked quietly, efficiently, with the same endurance she had survived on. She greeted guests, updated ledgers, answered calls, and sometimes paused at the window to watch the street below. Arthur didn't interfere. He came by occasionally, not in meetings or official visits, but just to sit in the lobby watching. Sometimes Mia and Miles would meet him there after school, racing in through the side doors with their second-hand backpacks bouncing. He would sit with them at the small cafe corner, sipping tea while they ate the scones left unsold from the morning's breakfast rush. He never brought toys or expensive gifts, only his time. Once he tried to make pancakes. The result was burnt, uneven, and slightly undercooked. The children ate them anyway. Later that evening, Mia drew a smiley face on a piece of tape and stuck it to a mug. She handed it to Arthur with a giggle. Written in childlike handwriting, it read, "Kind Eyes." The mug lived on their shelf. Time moved differently after that. He visited every few days. Sometimes to read a story, sometimes to fix a squeaky cabinet door. Sometimes just to sit on their worn-out couch with a hot cup of something and not talk at all. There was no fanfare in it, no obligation. He simply returned again and again until it stopped being strange and started being normal. Margaret never asked him why, and he never explained. But on one rare evening, when the children were asleep and the kitchen was warm with the scent of mint tea, she looked at him and asked gently, "Aren't you afraid we'll just disappear one day? That everything you've done might be for nothing?" Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "If even one moment here was real," he said, "then none of it was wasted." There was nothing else to say. He stayed longer that night. Months passed, the seasons shifted, Arthur's visits remained. A new routine formed, one not bound by business meetings or scheduled appointments. His penthouse remained immaculate and empty. But his evenings were spent in a modest apartment filled with the quiet music of family, unspoken trust, subtle laughter, and the clinking of mismatched teacups. One night, alone in his old apartment, He wandered through the perfectly polished rooms and found himself unable to sit still. He stood at the window overlooking the city and felt none of the usual power, none of the pride, only a gnawing silence. He opened a drawer in his walk-in closet, pulled out a designer suit, ran his hand across the label, and then shut it without taking anything. The suit didn't matter anymore. The next day, he returned not as a guest, not as a savior, but simply as Arthur. They didn't need explanations. Mia opened the door before he knocked. He stepped inside and took his usual seat at the table. They poured tea. Outside, the sky glowed amber as the sun dipped beneath the city skyline, and in that small room, cluttered, imperfect, full of mismatched furniture and echoes of laughter, Arthur Blake finally felt what no skyscraper, no boardroom, no investment had ever given him. He felt home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us share more real, meaningful stories like this one. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too.